For the latest Pirate Software Game Jam, the themes voted on by the community were alchemy and shadows. So I had 2 weeks to come up with a video game that somehow incorporated these two themes. I also wanted to challenge myself to draw all of the animation for my game traditionally on paper. I wanted to use this animation disc that I've had for years. You've probably seen animators using one of these. It's basically a fancy light box that you use for tracing. It holds your drawings in place, and you can rotate it when you need to draw something at a tricky angle. However, I didn't have any sort of desk to use it with, so I was going to have to build a desk of some kind for it. I may have bitten off more than I can chew, but I'm going to attempt to make a video game, build a desk, and do all of my animation on paper all in 2 weeks. Will I be able to do it? Let's see. Right away I had an idea for my game, and I started sketching some concept ideas. In my game, you would mix different color potions to create fireballs that you shoot at angry monsters. If the fireball was just the right color, the monster would become happy. I thought it would be fun if occasionally the lights went out and all the monsters appear in silhouette. You would need to light a candle to be able to see if the monster was happy or angry and what color he was. So for the themes of alchemy and shadows, for alchemy I was doing mixing potions, and shadows is when the monsters would appear in silhouette and you wouldn't know which kind of monster they were or how happy or angry they were. The potions would be primary colors, red, yellow, and blue, and when you mix them you'd get fireballs with secondary colors, orange, green, and purple. Fireballs would defeat monsters with complementary colors. Orange beats blue, green beats red, and purple beats yellow. For my animation desk that I needed to build, I decided to mock up a prototype with some cardboard. I knew I wanted a drawing surface that was at 60 degrees, but I wanted some options to adjust the angle. Also, some of the corners would need to be rounded off. This cardboard version helped me figure all that out. I started cutting some lengths of wood from this 1x3. Here I am accidentally getting in the way of the camera, and now I'm drilling some holes. I only worked on my desk here and there while I had a break from making my game. My ultimate goal for this project is to do all of the animation on paper and then bring it into the computer. But to test my game, I made some temporary artwork of the main character. I imported my temporary character artwork into Godot and made the player shoot in different directions. I did this by rotating the player's aim to point towards the mouse cursor wherever it is at on the screen. I created a fireball and made it shoot whatever direction the player was aiming. I drew some angry and happy versions of the monsters. These are just temp versions for now. I also wrote a script that changed the angry monsters to happy monsters whenever they are hit by a fireball. To test out the movement of the monsters, I created a tile set in Godot. This defines the floor areas and the wall areas. The monsters can walk anywhere on the floor and they'll bounce off the walls. Once this was working, I created 2 movement patterns for the monsters. The first was a pathing system. If the player got too close to the monsters would find the best path to the player and start chasing him. If the player got far enough away, the monster would just start wandering aimlessly around the level. When testing this out, I realized this would make it easier for the player to tell if a monster in the dark was angry or happy, based on whether they were chasing or wandering. So I changed it so angry monsters would occasionally wander around at random, even if they were in chase or attack state. I realized at this point my core game mechanic of mixing colors wasn't going to be fun for all players for accessibility reasons. Different types of color blindness make it difficult for some people to distinguish between red and green. Others might have trouble telling blue from green and yellow from red. So I changed my fireballs to different elemental bullets. So now I have orange fire bullets, green leaf bullets, and purple gas bullets. The different color monsters would have elements as well. Blue ice monsters, red rock monsters, and yellow pineapple monsters. I wanted the game to feel fast. The player runs around being chased, trying to shoot monsters, all while trying to juggle potions that he is trying to mix. So I wanted the potion crafting system to be on screen the whole time. I came up with a little graphical formula UI where this thing plus that thing equals another thing. The potions you would pick up would appear in the boxes, and you would be able to cycle through all the potions in your inventory to create different elemental bullets which appear after the equal sign on the UI. Meanwhile, on my desk build, I was doing some measuring to figure out just where to put my animation disc on the desk. Once the measuring was all sorted out, I just needed to trace the disc and then cut it out with a jigsaw. One of my personal goals for this game was to have an overworld map where you'd be able to pick a level and see your progress. I made some temporary artwork of 4 buildings that would represent the 4 levels of the game. I also came up with a 3-star system. Achieving 3 gold stars meant that you defeated 10 monsters in a level. 2 stars meant 7 monsters, and 1 star meant that you defeated 5 monsters in that level. So this is where I've realized I wasn't going to get my animation desk built in time. So I've resorted to using an LED light tracing tablet and a loose animation peg bar to do my animations. I didn't spend a lot of time on these animations. The monsters all just have a simple squash and stretch bounce. That's about 5 drawings. It took me about an hour to both rough out the animations in blue and then do the black line cleanup drawings. Once I was happy with the animations, I taped my peg bar to the table and set my camera up on a tripod. Here I'm using Dragon Frame software to capture my frames on the PC. Shooting the animation with my camera is maybe not the best way to do this. It might have been nicer to use a flatbed scanner, but shooting with my camera on a tripod is way faster, and I'm able to see my animation playback in Dragon Frame as I'm shooting. Because I used my camera to photograph my drawings, I needed to adjust the brightness and contrast of each drawing to get rid of the paper texture and make the lines black. I also adjusted the perspective of the drawings because my camera was at an angle. For frames that would need to be held for a while, I used After Effects to add some squiggle motion to the drawings. I exported the adjusted drawings and brought them into Adobe Animate, where I colored them in. I repeat this process for each monster, photographing drawings, editing them, and then coloring them. Once the animations were colored, I brought them into Sprite and made sprite sheets, and then I brought them into Godot and tested out how my animations were working. Here I am working on some final tile map artwork for the desert level. Originally, I wanted to base all of my animations and artwork on 1990s cartoons. Since I was running short on time, I didn't have much time for exploration, so I just settled for some black line artwork and a bright color palette. The neon purple and pink tiles that I created for the desert didn't really have a lot of ways they could fit together. I could only make some square walls, some square paths, and a couple plants. A more robust tile set would be able to make walls and paths of any shape. I created some health power-ups for the player to pick up. I made a slice of pizza, a sandwich, a milkshake, and a big leg of some kind of meat. These would provide a way for the player to regain some health, but also since I didn't have a lot of background art, this would be something else cartoony that I could use to fill up the space. I created 3 different colored candles. I also differentiated them by having different numbers of candlesticks, and also adding to the candlestick the sprite of the bullet that you needed to light each candle. I was in a hurry to finish building my desk, but it was never going to work properly if I didn't round the corners off on these support legs. This was probably the most difficult part of the build, and here I thought cutting corners was supposed to be easy. Once I had a clock, health bar for the player, a monster counter, and a level end screen all figured out, then I started building the individual levels. It was good to make sure all the different systems worked before I started making all the levels. Early on in testing my game, I used a partially transparent black polygon to make the scene get darker. This would make the tiles in the background get darker. Also, I make the color of the monsters black so they appear as silhouettes. Eventually, I added a dark vignette to the camera that would also turn on when the lights went out. It was a stylistic choice for me to keep the character brightly lit even though everything else is dark. This caused some complicated issues with parts of the background that needed to appear in front of the characters. So for the tops of walls and the tops of plants that appear in the foreground, I have a script that darkens those as well when the lights go out. I continued creating different level designs. I didn't spend a lot of time laying out each level, maybe only a couple hours of each. After creating all the tile maps and creating the levels, I had a better idea of what my levels should look like on the overworld map. Levels 1 through 3 are desert, snow, and jungle, and then level 4 is a combination of those three worlds put together. I wanted to be very clear to the player how everything in the game worked. In level 1, I put some text and arrows on the ground telling the player what to do. I also created an instruction sheet that you could view on the start screen or during the overworld map screen. Here we are working on my animation desk again. I needed to secure my support legs to the drawing surface, so I used these metal brackets and some tiny screws. It took forever to get these screws in. I really wanted to use my animation desk for at least one character animation, so I was holding off animating my main player character. Unfortunately, I didn't finish the desk in time, so here I am animating the main character just on a regular desk. I didn't really have an idea for the title of this game before working on it. As the deadline got closer, I was going to have to pick something. Title ideas I had were Potions vs. Monsters, Shadow Tunes, and Magic Mixers. Eventually I settled on the title of Mix-It Merlin, which is a play on the names of the characters Fix-It Felix and Wreck-It Ralph. When it came time to export my finished game, there were some libraries that I needed to download and install before I could export to the web. Since I hadn't completed a game using this version of Godot, I hadn't done this step before. Thankfully, I got everything working and managed to get my game published to itch.io in time. If you're doing a game jam for the first time, I recommend giving yourself a small buffer of time in case there are any hiccups like this during the last few steps. And here's the final gameplay. One of the last things I decided to do was give my player character an arm that points where he is shooting. When playing with a mouse in a web browser, you can tell where your mouse cursor is, so it wasn't necessary to give a visual indicator where he was going to shoot. But I realized if I was ever going to set up controller inputs, I needed that arm there to show where he is aiming. Also, the way it rotates around his body in all directions is kind of funny looking. It was exciting to finish my game and post it online. Even though my game is done, I just had one thing left to finish. After cutting and sanding all the wood I needed, I just had to assemble everything. I used these long bolts, some washers, and wing nuts to secure everything together. I used the wing nuts so I'd be able to adjust the angle or be able to fold the whole thing up. And just like that, the desk for my animation disc was complete. I just needed to add my disc and some paper. The first thing I decided to animate on my new animation desk setup is a new critter for my game. Even though I've already submitted my entry into the game jam, I want to make some updates to it in the future. I thought a bat would make a great addition to my game. First, I watched some slow motion reference of a real bat in flight and did some sketches. Now I'm doing some rough animation of a cartoon bat that should fit into my game world. After doing my rough animation, I do a pencil test to see how the wing flapping looks. I'm just capturing some frames here to see if everything is working. If it looks good, I'll do some final cleanup drawings before putting this in my game. Here's my pencil test of the bat flying. I think it could use a few improvements, but I think that's all for this devlog. I had a lot of fun, and I think this is a game I want to continue developing after the jam. I hope you enjoyed watching me make a video game with hand-drawn animation. Take care.